Welcome again to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises, the program about the book of Revelation, where we take an intergenerational approach to the book. I'm Jon Paulien, professor of religion at Loma Linda University, and with me is Nick.
Nick, the youth pastor at the Azure Hills Church in Grand Terrace, California, just down the road from Loma Linda.
And Shifra.
Shifra Thapaliati, youth and young adult pastor at Campus Hill Church, also in Loma Linda.
And then Guilherme.
I'm Guilherme Borda, and I am a PhD student at Andrews University.
And we have the privilege once more of having with us Dr. Gaspar Colon, who is Professor Emeritus of Religion at Washington Adventist University, has been dean, has been interim president of that institution, has served as a missionary on several continents, and best of all, my college roommate. And maybe even better of all, the father of Sarah Colon, who was a foundation stone of this program for the first couple of years. So welcome, Gaspar. Good to have you with us once more.
To be here. Glad to be here.
Fantastic to be with you again. So, Shifra, why don't you give just a quick summary of what we did last time, and then introduce a point that you would like to make.
Sure. I'll tell you what, last episode, Guilherme, you brought up this idea that the empire, a goal of an empire is to make you think that what you see is what you get. Did I represent you correctly?
I was actually quoting Walsh and Kismet from the book Colossians Remix, but yeah, that's the point they made.
And then right afterwards, Professor Gaspar, you brought up this idea of, in Revelation 13, there's this encouragement for the believer and the reader to see that there's a kingdom beyond the kingdom. Right. And so what I was thinking, as I was trying to synthesize these wonderful points, that as a guidance to the reader, you know, thinking, okay, coercion is a characteristic of dragon-sourced beastly power. So, okay, you know, no one likes to be coerced, but to be deceived is so much more difficult. And I think maybe even more fear-inspiring to me, at least, as a reader and a believer, because that means I'm deceived. That means I might not know when I'm being deceived by dragon-sourced beastly power. And so to have this, you know, guiding light that says, hey, to get the reader to think that what you see is what you get is deception. And it's a goal, it's an aim of these empires, as said in the Colossians Remix. I thought maybe it just needs to be a little bit more nuanced, because even in our faith walk with God, we walk by faith, not by sight. And like what you were saying, Professor Gaspar, it's kingdom beyond the kingdom. So it's beyond what we can see. It's beyond our immediate and our present future, or a present. How would I put it? I would say, when it comes to God, when it comes to the Lamb, Jesus, it's also not what you see. You don't get just what you see. You get even better. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the devil, right, Satan, that which deceives and is trying to deceive God's people, the world, you also don't get what you see, but you get worse. Discussion.
Yeah, well, in today's world, faith in Jesus is seen as kind of diluted and pointless in many circles, but it's much more than what you see. So I think that's a very pertinent point for today.
Sometimes it's not only what you see, it's what you smell. My wife and I bought a car one time, and there was a strong air freshener in the car. And when we got home after buying the car, we were like, this air freshener is too strong. And so we took it out, and then there was another smell. So it's not always what you smell either. And my wife and I are right now looking into buying a house. And friends have said, okay, make sure you smell all the rooms. So yeah, you gotta watch out for those things.
So the air freshener is kind of like a deception that we've been talking about.
Exactly. It smells better than it really is.
I may have alluded to this in earlier episodes, but the story of Judas and how Jesus washed his feet, as commented on by Ellen White in Desire of Ages, that when Jesus touched Judas' feet, a thrill was sent through and through his body to repent there and then, because he'd already made a scheme to betray Jesus at that point in the Last Supper. And it was just so touching, so humbling, so moving, this contradiction of power, if he's the Messiah, and such a humble gesture, right? Sign of humility. But then he kind of awakens to his senses when he's right at the verge of repentance, and he's like, snap out of it, Judas, is Schiffer's paraphrase. You know, it's like, if this guy is the Messiah, he wouldn't be washing my feet like a servant, right? Because what he saw in Jesus, like he I don't know, what I'm trying to say is the idea of the lamb being the conqueror, that's a paradox, right? The idea of a crucified warrior, that's a paradox, like to win that way, to pull from Greg Boyd.
And that, I think, is an important subtext of Revelation, that God subverts the powers of this world, not by being more powerful or more deceptive. He subverts them by going in a completely different direction. And we're called to do the same. And that's I think, a big piece to be concerned with here. Let's go to verse 2. And Guilherme, perhaps if you would read that for us. Verse 2 of chapter 13, I think, is a very interesting one.
Okay, chapter 13, verse 2. And today I'm reading from the Lexham English Bible. And the beast that I saw was similar to a leopard, and its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave it his power and his throne and great authority.
Now, if somebody just comes in off the street and reads that verse, it's kind of like, what is this? You know, it sounds like something really weird that came out of Hollywood somewhere. What do you guys make of this?
Yeah, it would just sound really strange. But for especially our Adventist group over here that studies the book of Daniel a lot, it brings to mind the beast from Daniel 7.
Do you think John's audience would have known Daniel 7?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if we can get into their mind a little bit, it'll be easier to understand. So what do you do with it? All right, if you're connecting Revelation 13, this beast from the sea, to Daniel 7, what are you seeing?
Just one thing, just to write a little bit more on your allusion. If someone walks in from the street, what would they make of this? I think one thing I might tell that person is, you know, a lot of good movies or books make allusions to other good movies and books. And so do songwriters sometimes make allusions in their lyrics, in little sequences of the melody. They make allusions, they pay tribute to songs and songwriters they admire. Novel writers, they will borrow from previous books. And those who know the previous literature or the previous movies or the previous songs, they will see, that's quite interesting. I recognize what I'm seeing here, right? And so in a sense, this is, the best of human culture has that characteristic, right? Of building and making connections with the past to make a point and bring that. And scripture does that too. And I would dare say God does that too, by giving a vision in a way that draws on previous visions. And also, I would say, on the culture around John as well.
All right, so what should we be seeing here? If this is an illusion, and I like the way that you frame that, in relation to books and movies and so on. Definitely something that goes on very much. And anytime you see a movie critiqued, they'll often say, well, this was evoking Star Wars or this or that, and sort of build. It's as you see the backstory, you can understand the front story better. So what's the backstory here?
In different kingdoms and different organizations, for example, John is looking backwards and he's seeing something resembling a leopard, and in his mind he's thinking, well, the leopard was the symbol of Greece, and then you have the bear, which it was a symbol of the Persian Empire, and he's looking back, and then finally the lion, which winds up being the symbol of the Babylonian Empire. So he's looking back at different empires that preceded, and the characteristics of these are important to the story and the narrative.
All right, so this beast from the sea, why is it a lion, a bear, and a leopard? Why is it combining all of those?
I wonder if it's kind of trying to make an amalgamation of all the different political powers that have been, kind of representing just earthly powers in general.
Hmm.
So you have a hybrid here.
And also, I think one could say that because there's this characteristic of a bear, of a leopard, of this, it has features, but it's not the lion. It has features, but it's not the bear. It has features, but it's not the leopard. It's a different one, right? So it also helps to see that although it has this, right? John didn't just say, and it has this feature of, it's similar to a leopard and left it at that, because then we could have said, oh, maybe it is that. No, but it's not. But there's also of a bear and also of a lion. So it has features of those, but it's none of those. It's a different one. It's one of the things that could be said. Now, one thing also I would say tentatively, as we put Daniel 7 and Revelation 13 together, is that the dragon was working with all of those beasts as well, to bring about his power. Of course, we also see that God also used those powers. But I think it's safe to say, especially if you go to Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar erects a statue and has people worship, that I think it will be natural to see the dragon behind that. So this is, I'm making very clear, this is a tentative point I'm making. I think we could also say that as the dragon is behind this beast, he has been working behind the scenes for a long time. That's, like I said, it's a tentative point I would like to make, which builds on the idea that we do see very clearly in Revelation that there is a political dimension to the conflict between Christ and Satan. And I would dare say it goes back very far.
I have a question for you, Guilherme. What did you mean when you said we see that God also uses those powers?
Well, we have that idea of Cyrus, and that is like this language that is used positively about it, So we also have in the Old Testament some positive language used, and you also have the idea of Babylon taking the people into exile. So there's that too, right? There's that side. I'm just trying to add a little bit of nuance because someone could say, wait a minute, but what about this, and that? So I'm just trying to, especially because I'm making a tentative point, to be generous enough and not too specific to make sure that we also take those texts into accommodation. But I think it is fair to say that the dragon has worked as he did through this hybrid, fear-evoking beast, that he has worked throughout the millennia with different human institutions to bring about his power, the same way as God has worked with human beings to bring about his power. Satan does use a similar strategy, uses human beings to bring about it. So the conflict is manifested in the political sphere, the economic sphere, social strife, all kinds of spheres. So we should make no mistake when we see different conflicts playing out. We should not think as human conflict as pure human conflict. It's more like the human surface of a much deeper conflict that's going on.
Now, the beast here in chapter 13 has 7 heads. Why 7 heads? And 10 horns. Now, we noted that the dragon had that too, but both of them are alluding to Daniel 7. What do the 7 heads have to do with Daniel 7?
I don't know. I have the same question. I noticed the difference. You know, there's those similarities we mentioned earlier, but then there's this 4th beast that I'm looking for in Revelation 13. In Daniel 7, it says in verse 7, after that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. So I think there are 10 horns, but I don't know about the 7 heads.
So we got 10 horns covered. Okay, yeah. That's good connection. And the interesting thing about is these beasts in Daniel 7, and when you study it out, I think some of you already mentioned, seems to be alluding to Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, which were 4 successive empires in the Old Testament period, and then sweeping through into the New Testament period. So those are all non-Christian powers and non-Jewish powers. But Revelation 13 seems to be of a different character. If you go to Daniel 7, count up the heads. Because the first beast in Daniel 7 has how many heads?
Oh. The first one has 1.
Yeah. And the second one?
I think 1.
Right. And the third one?
4.
And the fourth one?
1. There we go.
Do the math. So in verse 2, this beast is mixing elements of all of these beasts. And the blasphemy, of course, would remind you of that 4th beast, even if it's not, didn't get a name in the story here. So he's amalgamating all of these 4 beasts. And one way to show you that is by having it with 7 heads instead of 4 or instead of 1. So nothing is wasted here. This joint picture is being put together craftily. Now, here's something to keep in mind. You noted about the 10 horns of the beast. Did you notice that the dragon has crowns? But where are the crowns?
On his head, 7 diadems.
Okay, so on his heads, 7 crowns. 7 heads, 7 crowns. Okay. The beast from the sea, where are the crowns?
On the horns.
On its horn.
On the horns, all right. Now, if you go to Daniel 7, you see the beast first. It's described, it acts, then you see the 10 horns. So, and then the attention moves away from the beast to the 10 horns, and then later on comes another horn or a little horn that plucks up 3 of those 10 horns. And many scholars, including many early Christian, understood that 4th beast represented the Roman Empire. And they believed long before the empire collapsed that the empire would eventually collapse. They did not, early Christians didn't believe the Roman Empire would last through to the end because of Daniel 7, I think. I think it was Hippolytus, as one of the early church fathers, that specifically from Daniel 7 says, we know that the Roman Empire isn't going to survive.
Wow.
Because it will break up into 10 parts. You'll have the 10 horns, you'll have the 10 toes, if you wish, of the image in Daniel 2. So in Revelation 13, you're seeing a new character who has echoes of all these other characters, but he's somehow related to the time of the 10 horns, not the time of the beast itself. So after the fall of the Roman Empire comes another empire, this one speaking of godly things, and this one of a different kind. Shifra.
I just wanted to make sure I understood what you meant. So you said this Revelation 13 sea beast, correct? It is not of the time of the beast, but of the time of the 10
dragon.
horns.
Yeah.
Of the dragon.
Yeah, when you go to chapter 12, the dragon is there at the birth of Jesus and seeks to destroy Jesus at his birth.
Got it.
What other story in the New Testament could that be about?
Oh, that's not a rhetorical question. Okay.
You mean story. Like well, there's the Herod story trying to kill the, yeah.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. So that's live in the minds of those who'd be reading the book of Revelation. They know the Gospels, they know that story. And Herod tries to destroy the Messiah by destroying all the babies of Bethlehem. And you see that alluded to in Revelation 12. So this dragon is ultimately Satan, but is represented on this earth by Rome at the birth of Jesus. Now you have a follow-on of Rome. A new power comes on the scene with the face of Jesus. So what do you do with that? We have about 3.5 minutes.
And also just to bring, kind of trying to contribute to answering that question by bringing a question I think you asked in the end of the previous episode was, what about the time? And I think you asked about the 42 months. But we also see the 42 months in chapter 11, right? So I think it's helpful if we also consider chapter 11, where there is the Gentiles, the trampling by the Gentiles during those 42 months. And you have the different versions, 1260 days, 42 months, which if you put 1260 divided by 30, 42.
2 months.
All those things, right? When you think about it, I think that can help seeing those together, chapter 13 and 11.
I think we should hear from our special guest.
Well, one of the fascinating things that I see about the beast and what we're talking about in chapter 13 is the fact that this is not just a political talk, that there's a spirituality about it. There is a seeking to imitate a power that goes beyond political strength, that tries to capture the heart, that not only imitates but tries to substitute the work of God Himself. And so we have a spiritual implication that comes in chapter 13.
All right, and through the course of history, many people have looked at this text, and including some of the great reformers, Luther and Calvin and so forth, and they have seen in this text the medieval church. Is it possible that the very institutions that name the name of Christ may actually not be representing Christ well?
Yes.
Well, in the book of Revelation, when Jesus is speaking to the churches, He talks about those who call themselves Jews, but they're not, the synagogue of Satan. So in the book of Revelation, you have in the message to the churches, you have very explicitly, basically, Jesus saying, there's people who they're actually a synagogue of Satan. They say they are Jews, they're not. So even in that part of the book, which, you know, you don't see a lot of beasts and things and seems to be more straightforward, even in that part of the book, you see that idea of people who present themselves as followers of God, yet they're not.
So you're saying in the book of Revelation, we're already prepared to think critically about our faith.
Mm-hmm.
The churches of Revelation 2 and 3 are seriously flawed. Several of them almost totally flawed. You have a critique of the Jewish background of this church, the use of the term synagogue of Satan, and people, scholars debate whether that's a Jewish synagogue or whether it's meaning the Christian church that has elements in it that Satan is using. Here you have a power with the face of Jesus, but clearly serving Satan. So the book of Revelation is wanting us to be aware that deception can come from unexpected places. And so when many of the great reformers saw, you know, the medieval church here, interestingly enough, even today, you have had popes who have apologized and recognized that the church of the Middle Ages was not lifting up Christ as it should have been. But I'm looking at the young people, particularly here. What do we make of this now? People today don't like to critique other faiths, except that there's some value in it. And what would be the takeaway value for us if we recognize that the church, Christendom, has been seriously flawed? What do we take away for today? We have about a minute left. What would you say to the younger generation?
The friendship, you know, friendships are flawed, right? And fellowship can be flawed, but there is a blessing in fellowship with flawed people. So that's why I'm in the church community. But there is a hope that I'm so grateful for, because Jesus is not, and he is the reason for our fellowship, and he's the Lamb.
And I would also say that as there's the counterfeit, there's also the true one, because we see there's the faithful witness in chapter 11 as well.
So we are to be cautious not to trust in institutions, not to trust even in people, but to trust in the Word of God and to trust in Jesus Christ.
In terms
and
of salvation?
Ultimately the place to go. Yes, Shifra?
In terms of salvation, yes.
Yeah, exactly. The church can be a nourishment and a blessing to us, but it is a human institution. And it is as human beings, we seek to honor the God who has blessed us. But when we put our trust away from God into something human, ultimate trust, that can be a challenge. Well, thank you one and all for this special time together. This has been GPS, and next time we will continue into the latter part of chapter 13. See you next time.